up there, they blame you out every day. Good
All right.
problem.
Thank you everyone to coming out this evening. And we have quite a number of things that we can touch upon, expanding from meeting number one. This is the second meeting of our committee. My name is Carolyn Yeagle. I'm with Environmental Planning and Design. And do we need just an introduction or roll call for anything that's here, or we have all members situated? Okay. So why don't we get started? The community survey has had some real participation, very exciting success. Through yesterday, we've received 770 responses. Where we were last month was a lot less, different than that. And even within the last week, as we prepared these packets, we've received even 165 more comments and entries since last Monday. I think that as the township actually put some information out to the public, and did you have success with the digital notification?
No, we didn't.
Okay. Well, what we did do is we did attend the trick or treat event in Indian Lake Park, and there I had the opportunity to interact with probably at least 350 to 400 people. Not all of those people are residents of the township, but there were comments made at that event like, oh, I've already completed that. So people were aware of this. But the townships also put it out in different forms of media to be able to get. So 770 comments all within less than a month, pretty much, I think is something pretty notable in terms of what you have going on. So with that said, there are some different topics that were discussed here.
I'm assuming that everyone in the group also spread this around too, might contributed to that success.
Yes.
So it's good that we all went out and spread the word.
Thank you for
Yeah.
getting it to
That's not a very
your
good number.
neighbors and anyone that you may have some other organizational activity with. All right, so we're just going to hit some high level points of this because the survey results are going to be part of the comprehensive plan document. We do anticipate in the springtime there will be another element of outreach, so if we focus in on particular points of the plan and try to get people's feedback as maybe where they see priorities being or sort of balancing some things, they'll have the opportunity to do that. So for this time of year, I think we've ended at a really good point because people are busy doing lots of other things over the next 2 months or so, and we'll then have some more outreach in 2023. So of the people replying, about 50% of the respondents are satisfied with things going on, and you had another 20% that are just neutral to that. So you've got about 7 out of 10 respondents that are having some positive feedback to the community. In terms of, you add the very satisfied to that, and we add another 15%. So we have about 85% of the respondents that are, looking forward to some things. Then you have about 15% then that have some specific things that they really are looking forward to this plan taking a look at. In some cases, this plan is not going to be getting at some of the topics of interest, because this plan is one that is looking at the township's systems, the township proper, in terms of the local municipal activities. Other things that may relate to either things that are tangential to the township or that are related to something like the school district. Those particular topics are not going to be in detail addressed as part of this plan. But we do have some information that you as a township will be able then to relay to some of the other groups where that may be applicable. So with that in mind, There are a certain number of things that people have satisfaction, and it's quite a varied list, right? We've got 15 things at least that people sort of have in areas of interest. People they're close to their friends and family, they're born or raised here, they have satisfaction with the quality of the school district, they are close to work. About a third of the people or so, quarter of the people appreciate its suburban atmosphere, safety and police protection, and housing affordability. So there are quite a number of things that really capture people's interests. And I think why that's important is also in what the comprehensive plan is going to do is it hits on quite a number of these topics, right? And not everybody is looking at the comprehensive plan in, I'm saying, an overall way. They have a particular interest in a kind of planning or a kind of topic to them. So, go ahead.
Do we have any kind of trend? Are these topics going up from last year, down from last year?
We don't have a trend. So I'm not familiar with the township-wide survey that was done over the course of last year. If there were one, we
Okay,
can
just
pull
to
some.
see if we're doing
No.
better in some areas or worse, or
I-
what was working and what was, you know?
I think what is possible from your comment is if there were some of these questions that were posed back out, you know, maybe in the coming year, then you could do that kind of thing. I think as we were just sort of trying to get a baseline, this is a really solid one to those points. Now, the other thing that it does is it's gonna help us get at the particular themes, which we'll get to in a minute in terms of the kinds of things where the comp plan can hit. And then make sort of a trajectory or some goals to hit that. Okay. The kinds of things that people to date in this outreach have considered, what are the top 3 things that are needing the most attention? The land use, township programs and events, and then the roads and highways. So you sort of look at that from a standpoint of, again, the comprehensive plan. It's going to hit on all 3 of these things. So I think we have some good checkpoints here. There are some other things as it relates to sort of the institutional side, communication, open space, and sort of some of the infrastructure components. The areas that were identified within this list that were, I'm saying, the least needing of attention were public safety and public transportation, meaning those were not listed as high priority attention items compared to some of the other things. So I think these do hit upon comments that you all had last month with some of these topics. Anything that's a surprise here or further interest for you guys?
Would it be fair to say that the public safety, since it's school at level, and we're doing a good job at making the community feel safe with our police force?
I think that is actually a statement that you can equate, yes. And that that's something I think where of all of the topics, while we will be identifying things associated with that, the complexity of the kinds of solutions to certain things are probably, it's not going to be very complex. Where some of the other topics, they're going to be a lot of things folding in, they're factoring in to maybe being able to address.
I think kind of like with the public safety aspect, we have a lack of knowledge of how it all works.
Maybe a lack of use as well, along with public transportation. If you never have an encounter with public safety, just like
Think
if
it's
you're on a
going
bus,
fine.
you just really think everything's fine.
As a firefighter, I can't tell you how many times people think that in this community, everyone's paying fire, which is not the case. You have lack of training, lack of standardized training that's required, it's not there. So, I mean, I think people, whenever there's an emergency, when a fire truck with flashing lights shows up, they're doing a good job. When they might not be doing a good job, but they don't know it.
So considerations, I think maybe where you're going, about what people have a perception of and what people are, understand the delivery to be. And then that other element of what are some of the technical things that this township and other communities within this area, and I mean even in the region, there's a whole nother layer, right, to even what that level of involvement is, so trying to understand things. So there were some communities have done some other studies as it relates to even the types of alternatives that can be explored related to whether it's in recruitment or the training and things like that. So we'll be able to get into some of those particulars coming up. And I would agree with you, Harry, that people do have that recognition. All right, in terms of how things have changed, this is sort of a split. Some people believe there hasn't been much change. Other people think that there's movement where there's more desire being here. Others have identified that there is, a set of things that have made it maybe less so. So we need to think about what that means. And when we look at, again, the quality of life piece, we're going to be able to address some of this within the comprehensive plan. Now, there were quite a number of people who did enter comments as related to this survey. So these points that we're hitting now are sort of just that overview, and then we'll be able to look at some of the particulars as we keep moving in the months ahead. Okay, over the next decade, what are the most important aspects needed to enhance North Huntington's community character, and thinking really about 5 attributes to that. And so, when we look at this, we have 1, 2, 3, 6, 14 different factors. And the top kinds of things that people put as sort of these contributing elements, and what is it that is most important to the character. School district was high on the list. Public sports, fields, and sort of active recreational spaces. The parks fit into that, as well as passive recreational spaces. Safety, police, and protection. A sidewalk, greenway connections to parks, schools, and neighborhoods. Those sort of round out those top 5. Again, the majority of these are things that we will be addressing as part of the conference. Okay. So we keep moving. What are the major transportation issues here within the township? So excessive backups at signals was coming out. About 6 out of 10 people were identifying that. Cut through traffic or high speed on residential streets. Unsafe intersections require traffic control or other improvements. High speeds on major roadways. And that's really when we're looking at sort of about half the people are saying one of those kinds of comments. Now, some people listed specific intersections. That's helpful so that we can actually match it up with certain things as it relates to the public safety calls. So we've gotten a lot of good data as part of some of this feedback here. I think ultimately where the township goes with sort of its mashup of what's called active transportation, which is more of the people-oriented side of it, and trying to plan for that kind of system. When we look at, either sidewalk connections or greenway connections or other kinds of things, there's this term, active transportation. How many people before today have ever heard that kind of thing? All right, so Pennsylvania as a whole has really tried to think about 4 communities this term and some of it's planning jargon. But it's really looking at some transportation from almost the 180, right? So if vehicular traffic has been sort of in focus, and then work it down to the pedestrian side of it, it's turning that triangle upside down and thinking of the people aspect of it first and being that active. We're using wheels, or we're even using our feet, all those kinds of things. So we're going to explore some things related to that. It then has the opportunity for you as a body to be able to pursue other kinds of grants and make improvements, whether it's safety related, whether it's signal related, whether it is looking at sort of the reconstruction of some intersections. So this is going to be an important topic for us to dive into. All right. Did anybody here fill any particular points to that? Okay. Next. There are 4 objectives that the township has identified sort of in its other planning efforts, and thinking about things for recreational green space. And which of the 4 objectives do the people answering the survey think would be most important? Almost more than double, almost triple. The answer, most important, was addressing the recreational needs of all ages, abilities, and interests. So the system that you all have as, in terms of the township providing, that is reaching across the board, whether it is age or ability, and the kinds of things, that's foremost in people's mind, is the one of the 4 objectives, that one really rises to the top for people participating here. The other 3, just as a point of reference, are pursuing grant funding for the development of facilities, operating a responsible and financially efficient recreational department, and then developing joint use between private organizations, volunteer groups, and the township and the like. All right, just as a bit of background, there are the people that have replied to this survey. Almost 95, 96% of them own their home. It was a general question. And then how long have people lived here in terms of answering the survey? About a quarter of the people have lived here 1 to 10 years. Another quarter have lived here 11 to 20 years. About 20% of people have, let me see if I can do this one in a logical way. About 14%, we keep moving up to the next decade, meaning about 30 years. We add another 14, 15% there, rounding to be another, up to 40 years. And then 20% of the folks have lived here for more than 40 years. So very few people, all in all, I would consider as sort of new residents, meaning that 1 to 10 year period. So about 1 in 5, right? 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people have lived here less than a decade. All right. So, anything that's striking to you all? No? All right. If you have interest in taking a further look at the comments beyond that initial package, we have that information available. We can send it to Harry, and Harry, we can get that out.
I believe more on that link that you provided. That's it.
Yep.
I did print out comments that were sent to the packet. All that.
As of those last week, yeah, we've gotten a few more, yep, in the last week. All right, so, in moving on, let's think about how all of these things really relate to sort of 5 themes that have started to emerge from people's comments. In your packet, there is a color version, 11:17 version. And this really is the cloud in each of the 5 areas of the plan is sort of a summarizing statement to the kinds of things about that particular topic, right, or a potential direction. As we go through this, we're gonna think about sort of what some of the influences to these things are, and then ultimately where some of these, there could be tools in the plan that the Township Planning Commission, an elected body, the different organizations will be able to call upon. This was a first pass at just trying to organize some information based on some themes, and over the next several meetings, we can dive into each of these further. But from a theme perspective, 5 include housing and sort of its growth, those patterns, parks and recreation, traffic and safety, street safety, commercial sort of development and redevelopment, and then just that overall sense of community. I think that's sort of the umbrella piece, that purple one there in the middle, that rectangle. Is everyone able to see color?
Yes.
Okay. So, from a standpoint of housing, we have a chance to think about what are some of the influences to that. There is a high demand. We know that from some of that market information that we explored last time. The desirability of the school district, the zoning as it stands presently. Then there is also sort of what on the map has the ability to, have different scales of residential development, sort of how those things are assigned. Now, one of the things that also has not yet been, I believe, if we understand all of the things adopted to date, the community has, on its official map, and please clarify if I'm off here, does not have anything that is identified as a rural resource area or a growth area. Those are 2 different things called out within the municipality's planning code. They're very technical tools that the community can take a look at. Essentially, those 2 tools relate to lining up where infrastructure service is or is planned to be with where there would be areas zoned to support or to align, different densities with the infrastructure service. So next time, we'll be thinking about this sort of on a part, on sort of an area by area basis. But this is something that is very much a tool that communities can use. So consideration for really looking at, again, where infrastructure is and where infrastructure is planned to be in absolute syncing up with land use, right, is something we'd like to be able to think about with you all, if it's of interest, right, in exploring that kind of thing. So we're going to start getting into some very technical things in the next 2 meetings. So if it's all right with you, I want to just sort of introduce some types of ideas, and so that we can get familiar with the kinds of terms that they are, and then think about if we go through consideration for, a tool if it's of interest and where it could be applied. This also is opening up the consideration for if there would be updates to the zoning ordinance and or the subdivision and land development ordinance. So even from an application standpoint and the type of information that comes in the door, and being able to be evaluated and reflect upon, some of the things I think where there's a desire to balance out some of the things of development and then areas of conservation or lower density kinds of things. And then the other one is the consideration for the present way in which the PRD tool is outlined. Again, that's something within the municipality's planning code that you're able to do. But over the course of time, some of the things that have come in as PRDs and even the nature of how PRDs are proposed, and if there are ideas for potentially updating that within. So this housing piece has a lot to do with the specific land use regulations that are on the books within the township, so. Any thoughts there?
I was looking at some old zoning maps, and some of the oldest ones I find go back to the sixties. And it's interesting, you said something about there's no conservation districts, there's no, farming only. We have 6 residential districts from going back to the sixties. And the more rural areas are like the R3 and the R4 categories, those were all the farms. And you mentioned Barnes Lake Road before. Well, that road was dotted with farms, and now there's 1 left, 1 or 2 left. So over time, you know, if people aren't farming it and they're putting the property up for sale, the family doesn't want to carry on the business, and then a developer is grabbing it, and then Commissioner Gray can attest to this, but over the period of the last 20 or so years, our boards have been pro-development, so the developers are coming through asking for small changes to make minimum lot size smaller in some of these districts. So instead of, you know, 5 houses an acre, they're getting 10 or 15. So just these little nuances are taking those larger parcels of what was open space and ag land, and now they're somewhat dense residential developments.
And so, I think that is actually just, I mean, scratching the surface kind of comment, if I may, because the balance piece to that is, what is the infrastructure, the public infrastructure system that is needed in order to support, right, that potential for the densities that are being discussed.
And it was kind of like dominoes, because, you know, the developer would put sewage and water in for one
Right.
community. Well, the farm next door becomes more valuable because there's sewage right next door. So let's extend that sewer line. So it just sort of grows. And that's why I see possibly the 993 corridor in the future, because there's not a lot of public sewer there. All the low-hanging fruit is gone, so you're gonna see developers invest more money to try to develop that when people are starting to sell their large parcels of 80, 100, 150 acres that they don't want anymore.
And so I think what is important to consider from the infrastructure standpoint is the way in which the public entities have certain responsibilities or ways in which they can be providing those systems. And then where they're on the private side, where there's development proposed, what potentially is a responsibility or an element, right, of their proposal. So the consideration for identifying where that growth is, and then where consideration for where maybe rural resource area is, starts to distinguish essentially who has a responsibility, the first responsibility, to say, this is the system that will need to be put into place, and then how does that work? So if we essentially, I'm going to just use the very simple term because I know we don't have a map up, but if we just even considered a donut, very friendly donut, right? And the outside of the community is the perimeter of the donut, right? And then let's say that where the hole is, we treat it, that's where a lot of the historical established portion of the community is, right, inside the donut, so that inner piece. And in between the two, where you and I would probably take a bite of that donut, that area of the community is not really developed a lot. Right? So it's essentially consideration for in what space or what time does other infrastructure happen and sort of go into the ring of the donut, right? And it's not saying that infrastructure can't happen. It's a matter of what this tool does within the municipality's planning code is it identifies who has the first responsibility of providing that infrastructure. If it's within a growth area, it becomes a public responsibility, meaning that they say, we will guarantee that there will be infrastructure within this growth area and it will be provided as a public infrastructure element. If it is within the rural resource area, there can be infrastructure there, but it does not become the public's responsibility as the provider to build that infrastructure. It can be provided then by the private sector. So again, it's not saying that development stops. It's a matter of who is having that first responsibility of offering it out. So I think what the tool is for further consideration, we can look at the land use patterns and all those kinds of things as to where infrastructure presently is and where those kinds of other lands or even the characteristics, right, of those lands are, and consider if this is something that you all would like to have as an idea within the plan. Designated growth rural resource are the terms and these associated with these tools. Okay, moving to one that probably was the most popular amongst the themes was parks and recreation. So people, by and large, this quote is saying, we desire more recreation, more parks, more open space facilities, specifically a community center with activities and programs for all ages. Well, that is something that was common, and I would like to identify that a community center does not necessarily mean something that is four walls with everything under the sun. I think that's important to go into this first part of this discussion. Because I think when we break down what people were trying to consider what was valuable, we need to actually go back to that statement of what would they value, what was the major objective that they thought was most important. Remember those four? It was providing for all ages, abilities, and interests. So when you couple that objective that you all have in place today, and that there is a lot of support for, the primary support for, with something along these lines, I think that it's really a consideration for what does that mean in terms of what is either a community center or a space for people to gather. Further, we couple that with the desire for open space. Coming back to our land use discussion, you see we're getting lots of layers. All the cake's we've got lots of donuts to stack on top of each other. All different flavors, all different kinds. But the consideration for where people are going, if they're going here in the community, if they are traveling outside of the community, if there are opportunities for partnerships with other municipalities and some of these types of things, with if it's related to schools or some sort of other kinds of broader regional considerations. The proximity that you have to White Oak, as a county park, not too far, but you also have things within Westmoreland County that are just up the road. So there are certain things where it's becoming more of a consideration for how some of the municipalities have things that are a local offering, and then how a municipality becomes a provider of information about other opportunities that may be beyond the township, or that there may be another kind of offering on the private sector side, right? So it's a provider of information proper, and it's a provider of, it's a provider of recreation proper, and it's a provider of information for the kinds of facilities that you may not be offering. So, did anyone, just out of curiosity or in your groups that you interact with, have people telling you anything about sort of this parks and recreation piece directly? Yeah? You mind? Was that high on their mind?
Yeah, community center, it seems always to be or has been.
Okay.
For the last 14 months.
Yeah, me too. So from, when we look at, and there were that stack back in your book, right, of sort of what are the dynamics what are the ages, that what do people have an interest, how are people spending their current dollars on different types of recreation. The notion of sort of pulling out some of the past considerations for how the community center concept has been studied, or what facets of that have been studied, or where are there potential partnerships for those kinds of things, because it is, it's a dynamic that I think would probably be a whole separate arm, you know, of this. But we want it within this plan, identify those major pieces, and then set the stage for some possibilities if it's, again, something that is of interest in, you know, further pursuing here. I think what is significant from some of the things that we have read, and the input that we received, and probably more importantly, that people have shared at some of the events, because it was an amazingly popular afternoon at the Indian Lake Park for the trick or treat. I mean, it was nonstop for hours. And we ran out of information except for, I think, the last 30 or 40 people. And so we had, besides candy, treats. But in terms of even thinking about the cards, what people have an interest in doing for recreation, it's a characteristic of your community, no doubt. And what they've identified is the ability to also be able not to just come to the parks, but that piece where they made the comment of how can some of the neighborhoods even connect up with the parks. And when we balance that out with something we explored in meeting number 1, is what does it take from a personnel standpoint in order to be maintaining the facilities at the level that people expect. So a whole other portion of the equation that we want to make sure. Any other thoughts in the group? This is a big no.
Do people make the distinction between a community center and one that's more sports oriented
Athletic.
and an athletic center? Because that's what I've found in my circle, is people don't understand the difference between the two. And a lot of people say they want a community center when really what they want is a major athletic complex.
Yeah, they're thinking like
So-
Lynchfield with the,
Yes.
the Roderick Center and all that, that's what they're,
The pool, the volleyball courts, the basketball
Right.
courts, the baseball field, that's what people want. They don't want a building to where you just go and, I don't even know what you do in a
Put up
community
some
center.
tables and
Yeah.
have a pop-up.
Just sort of hang up.
Right, me as a father of young kids, I would probably never go to a community center, because I don't even know what a community center is for.
Yeah.
But, like, recreation and athletic things, I think is what people are more or less saying when they say community center.
I think,
So-
I think that is an important piece. I think that when we look at the array of comments, there's probably a significant percentage that are what you're talking about. I think what's probably very significant for this set of things that we're doing is to think about the objective that rose to the top of all ages, abilities, and interests. And looking at this from afar, I'm trying to be objective, that kind of facility may or may not fulfill that objective. So it takes some careful consideration. It very well can. But I think it takes some careful consideration when you look at how that kind of facility would be able to satisfy or fulfill, probably is a better word, of the all ages piece, right? It functions very differently, if I may say, when we're considering what those kinds of offerings are. If we have particular kind of committing spaces to different things, or the flexibility of it, so that it can move at different times of the day to different ages or what have you, right? So, I think. There's
That makes-
lots
I
of
mean,
these
that-
together.
I mean, that makes sense to what you're saying, right? I mean, obviously, as a resident, I'm more subjective to the needs of the kids and the teenagers, right? But I get what you're saying for, you know, the senior citizens in the community, their needs are gonna be
Well, isn't
different,
pickleball
but-
is like fast grown sport, seniors play it, a lot of seniors play that. So there could be, somebody who get to recreation, youth and being older, not recreation, is that what you're saying?
I think she was trying to explain the distinction between,
Some
you know,
fields and courts that
different
end
groups
up
of-
getting
yeah.
allocated to the space.
Yeah.
And what their potential of those space or those allocations are to being able to move across the, I'm saying an age continuum. I'm saying not everything has to be for all ages. That's not what it's saying. It's saying within what's being provided, right? And then I think giving a fair shake to things across it.
Yeah, I don't think teenagers want to play with senior, pickleball with senior citizens and vice versa.
You see it in other towns. you see it,
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, the pickleball community does seem to have a pretty broad base.
Hey, if they can do it, more power to them.
Yeah.
But any of those, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we put a disc frisbee course in for the township, is that being used? I would imagine that's
To
being
Dan Miller,
used.
that is heavily used.
Yes,
Is it heavily?
yes.
We really haven't had a grand, ribbon cutting or publicized it. Right now, we are building the tee boxes, the concrete tee boxes, 18 of them. That should wrap up, probably by the end of November. But it's being actively, every time I drive up there, there's always a need for people playing, carry around backpacks.
Yeah, so.
So I think it's
That's
really
a
gonna take off
specific-
next year in the spring,
Yeah.
as we advertise it throughout the winter.
I think that disc golf is also something, at least in this region, where people will travel to those courses. There is one municipality in South Hills of Pittsburgh where 1 in 10 of the survey replies was specifically about disc golf. And I did check, I thought, is there somebody that's just, is this a repeat of an IP address? Like, how much is it? And no, the answer. So meaning there is a dedicated circuit to it. And I'm anticipating, to your point, that it's gonna have quite a level of participation.
So I think when you
People
talk
outside
about
the township.
community center, it's all of that, right? It's disc golf, it's pickleball, it's a basketball court, it's maybe a baseball field.
I know, like, once there's inclement weather, you're looking for something to do with your kids. Like, my kids are very active, and you can't play basketball in the rain, but if there's indoor court or something, you can shoot ball, you don't have that available around here.
And so the question then also, as part of, these discussions, is thinking about what is it from a public sector offering? What is it from, I'm gonna say quasi, meaning public, meaning there are different groups coming together, joining together, to sort of balance out the responsibilities and the commitments to those, or, is it private? Like, how does that work? So the consideration for, what it is to put up a building, design a building, put it up, but then also that administrative side of what would it take to, run it and maintain it, right? So definitely sort of that triangle of all those pieces. And frankly, if it's, the center, what people think are four walls and stuff happening inside versus that complex piece where there are multiple things that are happening. Now, the land in which it, is available to do things at different scale also gets into some of this. And it even goes back to our first question as to how do people get to it, or how is it accessible to people? Is it within sort of this network of connected spaces, or is it something else?
Well, something that you mentioned a while back was other facilities that were available to the public.
Yes.
And a while back, they had senior citizens doing aerobics and stuff at Shirley's complex. So that's a way that we can tell people where this is happening, so that they have access to it.
What you're highlighting is take the opportunity for this effort to actually pull out some of the information that the township put together as part of its comprehensive parks, recreation, and open space study a number of years ago, And then, that is a provider of the recreation, but it's also a provider of information, right? As to, here are some other things that are going on. So we as a community may not need to be a provider of it, I'm making this one up. If there are 3 others that are doing it at different scales or different kinds of things, and people just may not even be aware of that. So very much being able then to also build upon what you as a township have been doing as part of that. And we can get that information, out into the open here a little bit more. Yes, 'cause lots happen. Okay, we'll hit on traffic and street safety here down in the bottom left. Yellow, there is there's comments about congestion and signals and all those kinds of things. Intersection configurations. Some of these are just ongoing coordination with PennDOT. The pace at which some of that happens is a little bit different than if the township's able to do certain things on its own local streets. But you do have, you're not unique within Westmoreland County where there is a major corridor that sort of comes through here from one east to west. There are quite a number of similarities within municipalities across the county. The consideration for how this can truly match up with some of the things as it relates to what is becoming a priority with PennDOT and active transportation and those kinds of pursuits, and sort of getting those topics up in front of this planning effort, so that when you're in discussions with PennDOT and being able to introduce some discussions if it's further safety or alignment, and maybe how you've pulled that apart. You've pulled that topic apart a little bit more deeply, and you've started to think about it again in context of how they're trying to move forward with some of their other
Reading through all
initiatives.
those comments, it seems like the majority of the congested roads are all the state roads,
Yes.
where
And that
all
is
the local
outside
roads get to.
Yes.
So, your hands are kind of tied on what you can do other than begging PennDOT to do something.
Which probably leads to the other problems of cut through, right? State roads stink, so I cut through the neighborhood
Yep.
to avoid the traffic.
Well, you always wanna work with your local state official, our state rep and our state senator who covers our area. They have a direct connection with PennDOT. They brought in and taken on tours of the township annually and addressed the areas that need addressed for PennDOT. On now.
I don't.
Not since I've been here, but that is a great idea.
Or even also compiling information with the police, fire and EMS of, accidents in certain areas.
Yeah, taking a look, I think we're, as part of this, and being able to look at that and map that data so
Right,
that people
yeah.
understand where those concentrations are.
Yeah.
And then maybe even where, so to your point, that if we can get information within this plan, so that when there is the opportunity and making the opportunity at, maybe if it's a regular increment or some sort of increment, and say, guys, we know that this is, to your question of, is it we're establishing that baseline, because we're gonna look at, and what does that mean in terms of a potential trend, right? And then you being able to have almost that round table with them. It's almost like you have a planning breakfast, where you get this kind of, and you put those kinds of things up, and it even starts at, twice a year. So,
If you're able to take like, say Barnes Lake Road, how much traffic is on that road? How much traffic is that road designed to carry safely? And, upgrades need to happen. I'm just using that as one example of a road, but getting all that data compiled, that way you can be like, well, no problem.
Yeah, I like your accident data too, because I think there are certain intersections, I mean, I don't know why, but it seems like there are certain intersections that seem to have, like, I live by Colonial Manor Road, it seems like every time I try to leave, there's an accident, I'm there in front of Colonial Manor Road. Why? Like, when you're turning lane, like, is there a reason? Like, I don't know if they study the data for why particular accidents happen and if there's a trend.
So if think what some of the other information that can go into this set of discussions is actually, so you as a township having development data, meaning particular to now what has happened over time as it relates to the number of houses. And you have, right, as part of your application review process, people need to do traffic impact studies, right? So there is a good bit of information that has been submitted through these types of things, and being able to sort of put that cumulatively together. So when you have these discussions of, okay, we've now have a net change of X, right? We were anticipating it was Y, but really we're at X now. You can go into those kinds of discussions a bit more, as an active participant, and saying, guys, what do we have the opportunity to do? Because clearly, when you couple what is happening here with people, myself, who are coming through, right? Those two things get added together. So if there has been also a change in some of the things in surrounding municipalities, because I believe you don't necessarily receive the applications from surrounding municipalities, right? As you guys are planning things, so that you can understand sort of what's happening on a traffic impact type of thing, if there's a proposal or development.
Just for wells, that's the only thing I get informed about, or a gas line replacement, something like that.
Yeah, so the consideration for what's happening around you, and being able to understand that information. So we'll reach out to some municipalities to see if there are any, we'll pick a time frame, just as a sample. And so we can put that kind of information together for you within the book, so that it can sort of set the pace for how that kind of conversation could go. An example. What's happened here, also what's happening in the front. All right. I like your breakfast, or you like your gathering.
Yeah, you don't have bus.
Yes. Do the tour, because people love to go on tours, right? All right, or maybe it's a figurative. Are you literal or figurative? Okay. Commercial areas, non-residential areas. We have a limited mix of commercial uses. Now, let's think about some of the comments that were identified as it relates to non-residential, sort of how the general public perceives sort of some of this, land use pattern discussion. What is important to identify is that a lot of land use decisions, I think even at meeting number 1, we were talking about this, there are certain permissions that you have within your zoning ordinance, and then you have a much bigger influence, which is actually just market, right? We're here in Western PA. So the consideration for the kinds of businesses that are drawn to the area, I think you were talking, Eric, right, about some of even the office uses or other kinds of uses when people are trying to identify sort of what those trends are and what's happening now, what's happening in other places, and how they as a business can fit in. So the township itself, I think all of us possibly here recognize that it's not the one that is courting businesses, right? Businesses are looking at what the patterns are within an area, and then sort of having these different land use pursuits on their end. They line it up as it is applicable or not within the context of zone. So as we also know, in Pennsylvania, every municipality needs to provide for every kind of land use that there is. It's just the way it's all set up in terms of the municipality's planning code and all the sort of decisions that have been made over time. So you as a community, in any sort of update to the ordinance, will also need to continue to entertain that all kinds of land uses are needing to be permissible in different places here. I think if we match this up almost with those concepts of where there could be growth, where there could be sort of the resource area, where the roads are, where the utilities are, and all of those kinds of things, and then being able to take a look at where there are influences locally and even regionally, as you're right adjacent to a turnpike exit. That's going to shape some things. Audio oriented versus long. All right, that's gonna be a good nut to crack. And then lastly, or again, our umbrella of having a greater sense of community. So when we were lining up about 85 plus or minus percent of people are satisfied or having, you know, positive recognition of things going on here in the community, there's this other underlying tone of what does it mean to be a community? And I think that answer has shifted just over even the last couple of decades, or even the last couple of years. What does it mean in terms of how do we interact with one another? So this one is a consideration for a lot of different things. And I think people that have participated so far in this effort are ones that have an interest in ensuring that the livability of North Huntington is sort of at the top of the strategy. So in some cases, this could be tied back to open space or connections for it. In others, it could be just even the process, right, of being able to participate. So, a lot of different things. I'd have to ask, of these five, when you were talking to, you know, the folks that you were reaching out to or having the chance that people asked you questions, were there any topics that we didn't hit? Is there a sixth topic in your mind? The theme?
The music program in one school district, I was told, that would be the best, will make a thing for them. It's one of the best in the state. So, you get the caterers and that program, I didn't see that on here, but you said earlier that would be separate from forward.
Yeah, I think the notion, I mean, where it gets into sort of the sense of community, you have people that are focused and sort of in that whole genre, right? I mean, they're drawn together. That is definitely largely a group. I mean, building, you know, a whole sense of communication.
They bring thousands of people into the township every year, and these people come in from 20 different school districts, and eat our restaurants and shop in our businesses and see our community. And it's an opportunity to showcase what we have here.
I think it moves a little bit to what we discussed last time, where it's difficult to distinguish North Huntington from Norwin, right? Because the Norwin High School is putting on the light show for Christmas, right? It's, even though the advertisement, I think, said,
Well,
you know,
we're
concert
putting
with
it on.
North Huntington,
Yeah, the
right? But
taxpayers
it's
pay it.
at the high school.
Yeah.
It appears to, like, the
It's like a
school
school
district
function.
is driving that and delivering that outside separately from North Huntington, right? It just
The
feels
perception.
that way, I think, because you're at the school district,
How is that a problem, or why is that a problem, just to
I just think,
spend energy on it? How is it a negative perception anyway?
I don't think it's a negative perception. I think it's a difficult perception to separate Norwin and Arwen and North Huntington, right? Because that is the greater area. People generally think of Norwin as the community, not so much North Huntington versus Arwen, right? And I think because that school district is the anchor for all those different communities.
Well, there are even some religious institutions or things with that name, right? I mean, it's not just a school district, it's people have adapted that for other
Right.
types of,
Yeah, speaking of those, I think the Norman School District kind of ties the two communities together. You know, there is sort of a division between Irwin and North Huntington. A lot of people don't even know which community they live in. But I think the Norman School District is the binding thing that puts everybody together. It makes it more of a community.
Yeah,
Right.
and we're talking about that being the centerpiece here of community. So I know we mentioned to keep the school district sort of out of things because we're talking about municipal code and municipal planning, but I think our school district is very important part of our,
Right.
our planning for the municipality, whether it's North Huntington or any of the other municipalities in the school district.
Right, I just think like, great, you think, Irwin's gonna have their light up night this week, right? Lots and lots of people from North Huntington are gonna go down to Irwin. and
Most of
no-
the people going
and
down are from
no-
North Huntington.
And nobody's gonna distinguish between Irwin doing the light up night or North Huntington doing the light up night. It's a fun activity for all ages, for everybody to go to and experience from the general Norwin vicinity.
Yes.
So, would you say, I'm feeling this one out myself as well, when it comes to thinking about this as a comprehensive plan, that there is a very technical, there are going to be portions of this plan that are very technical in nature to consider these sort of systems things like land use and infrastructure and roadways and all, you know, I mean, and sort of the parks and recreation. And that is North Huntington, right? I mean, that is the physical piece to our
Right.
plan is North Huntington. This other element, maybe a side-by-side almost, or, you know, holding hands, I don't know, come up with some analogy, I'm sure. But is, that broader community, your sense of community. That where there are some lines that you don't actually have drawn on a map in terms of how they function.
Right,
Yeah,
I think
or the
community-
collaboration
The community
piece.
as a whole is North Huntington and Irwin and North Irwin, and that's where the community piece
Okay.
comes in a lot more than the map drawing that
Municipal.
says, this is North Huntington's
Okay.
responsibility, this is Irwin's responsibility. People in general don't care, right? They just want it done. Somebody do it.
Well, I think too, that the whole we seek a greater sense of community, like Mr. Kerber said, like, I don't think that people are thinking, like, I want specifically a greater sense of North Huntington community. I want a sense of Norwood community, because they're not thinking that there's much of a distinction, so the sense of community, I think, is for the whole group.
So that functional and operational piece is municipal.
Right.
And the, blanking on a word, but it, I mean, is that there's a broader piece.
And I do think that also weaves into some of the parks and recreation, because one of the things you have on here is that, you know, we do rely on school district facilities. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? And that could be like, hey, that could be part of our communication plan, like we're saying, let people know about facilities that are available. Those can be available. We may be able to make them more available if we ask some questions. So those are things I think that weaves in,
Okay.
because there are facilities that are not necessarily township facilities that fold into this whole, you know, all three communities sort of sharing some stuff.
So I think that even, that enables the discussion, or that allows for the discussion about responsibilities and the time that it takes to take care of some of these things, maintain, you know, to be able to be sifted out a little bit too.
It's also the number one reason why on our survey, why people
Yes.
move to township. It's because, not because of the North Huntington School District,
Right.
because of the quality of our school district.
Yep.
And there are other, so I know like Franklin Regional, for instance, they offer like aqua aerobics at their pool for the community. I don't know that we do that, maybe we could, like that's a facility we already got, that maybe we're not making optimal use of.
As a planning committee though, we can't direct what the school district does, but we can add it to the township plan as a recommendation, right? I
You
guess
can.
it's for-
Well,
Right, or do
right,
you, the consideration for.
The
who's
township
involved?
could potentially run an aqua thing, right, and rent, it's, from renting, like the cafeteria or stuff from Boy Scouts in the past, right, it's relatively cheap to rent the room from, at least, I'm not sure about the pool, but to rent the space for an hour or two and hold an activity there, right? Maybe the township's responsibility is to set that up, find an instructor willing to go
Right.
and do it, and they can rent that for $20 an hour,
And then
$50,
gym
or
space.
whatever it happens to be, right? The school district will, you just work with the school district to balance the school needs versus the greater community, right?
Well, they actually
Much
did
cheaper
do that
than
for a while, until the swimming pool needed
Yeah, it
renovated.
needs
and all.
repaired, right?
Yeah, they did have like a senior swim night, certain nights, and so you could go up and use the pool. I don't know whether they actually had a program, but, there was an
Mhm.
evening where seniors could go up there. So we were accessing some of the
Yeah, and I
school
think,
district
right, like the
things.
track's open till dark or
Yeah.
something like that, so you could go up and walk, given that the students aren't having track practice at the track.
You know, we talk about just recreation, but I think the school also has to take a better responsibility for that too. We have how many, 6, 8, 10 buildings? They're taxpayer funded. The people in this community are paying for those. I often wonder sometimes, I'm sure they have to pay for janitors, but some of the fees, I think, are not fair for something the taxpayers already paid for, and I think the school would supply a lot more recreation responsibilities or activities for the people that want to do them. I just think everybody needs to step up and work together, and maybe we don't need a big new rec center. Maybe we just need to use the buildings more than what we have right now.
Or
From-
are you able to put township money into enhancing some of the facilities at the school in a partnership? That, you know, basketball courts, for instance,
Right.
if they're all being used, could we add on to the building, to add a little bit more space? I mean, all the schools have plenty of space.
It would be a
I
lot
just-
cheaper to do something like that and build new buildings.
Yeah, I just know when we've rented them for scouts, it hasn't been extremely expensive to rent either the cafeteria area, or we've rented the community room at Stewartsville to hold some meetings, not very expensive. The basketball programs that my kids have participated in haven't been extremely expensive, so I don't think the school district is out there milking these organizations and keeping organizations out.
So I think what I'm having as a takeaway at this point is that some of the discussions, well, one, in terms of pulling out some information that you all have as part of some of your past efforts, but putting that closer to the top where people are recognizing, all right, these things exist, right? These are offerings. And then the consideration for where there could be either additional collaboration or possibilities of it. So while we're not doing a deep dive back into the update for the park and recreation plan in this effort, there are some certain things I think that have bubbled back up to the top and that we should be able to look at in terms of what the possibilities of them are, maybe in a different lens. Yeah, go ahead.
Back to like accessibility, instead of
Yes.
having one rec center, community center, whatever you wanna call it, that the community wants, you have how many schools that are in neighborhoods spread out through the township, which is more accessible. So if you have access to all those buildings for
I don't
the
know.
community to,
I think a partnership with the school is a much more logical solution to the rec problem.
In your experience working community planning, I've never seen a school or a municipality really like share facilities that deeply. There's always been a board for the school and a board for the municipality, and they kept things pretty separate. It's a great idea, it's a great idea. If you could
Maybe
use
it's
it.
time for a
Could
change.
you be that provider of information to say, we don't have basketball courts for your program, but you could potentially reach out to the school district and they're available, right? So it's again, facilitating that information so that people can find the resource even if the municipality doesn't provide the only
I think that is a very solid, like, step one, meaning, and so even the consideration in this effort of being able to have the introduction, explore the possibilities of just, taking it to the next discussion, because what is available at certain places and what is not available, at certain buildings, those kinds of, that varies as well. And, so I think between now and the springtime, or the middle, or June, I think is when we were, May, June, that is a very doable step. I think what it does also do is it sets you all up in a forward way that lets look at what the true feasibility of something that this is, bit by bit, not taking on an entire large chocolate cake with so many layers that nobody's ever gonna be able to finish
I think
in your dinner time.
another thing that it does too is if you start to offer stuff, you see what stuff is getting used and what stuff isn't, what programs people are signing up for and what they aren't. So you get a better sense of like, if I did offer stuff, or if we did build a building, what would we need in it based on past participation in the things that we have offered?
And so from a programming perspective, where people were commenting, right, about their interests or having things of broader interest, it's even, with all due respect to consideration of what time is available for staff to be able to offer those. Are they partnering with other people in order for those things to, are they, offering out a facility so that some of those activities can be provided? And that's step one, seeing what the level of interest is. It's almost like any sort of programming department has the opportunity where 25% of the things that are on their list possibly are one time. It's just a field, is this even a possibility for us? So it's not like the list needs to be this solid, everybody's gonna participate in every single one of these things, because it's fielding that level of interest. And that's part of the function, it's not a failure. It's like, what can we take to the next level? Or 10 years ago, we didn't even know that you put a fermented cucumber together with a sphere and say pickleball. We didn't even do that, right? So it's the consideration for trying some things out, right? And then thinking about how they, all right, so this other piece, and I know we got a 6:30 set of scouts coming in here, but we have started, and this says draft for a particular reason, arraying and coupling. This is an 11 by 17 at the top. It was the preliminary municipal benchmark comparison. This is it, or it's on the list.
Me and Eric are from that.
Yes, they asked.
No, hey, just totally just.
They asked that if we can take a look.
I know, right next door.
So, the consideration here, so we can get White Oak. We've started to pull out some particular characteristics, and just knowing we tried to equate as much information as we could from budgets that have been provided. We have some phone calls in just to verify some of these things. So again, we'll be coming back with some fine tuning here. But I think what is important to consider is some of this is quantitative, and other points that were being discussed as part of the benchmarking were more of a qualitative piece, right? And so you can take a look. We tried to color code some things in terms of, there you go, it's in your packet. Of maybe where there were some more comparable versus maybe not so. And so we started to do that in the first part, and as we finalize the data, we'll be looking at this on the overall sheet as well. But the categories here are sort of government and general costs. Recreation and parks and open space, in terms of how either it's the budget or the, type of, actual physical characteristics, roads and streets, and then public safety. So these were sort of hitting on those major systems. And you can say, wow, this is off, or this is, sort of an interesting thing, and sort of where we fall. Does this shape exactly what North Huntington needs to do? No. But what it does do, I think we were having that set of curiosities, right, in terms of, well, how does how are other places addressing this, or what kinds of things are they putting into this? So,
Can you explain
Please.
the value return on municipal services per $1 municipal tax paid out? Is that just?
so, yes, if you give me 1 second here. We have done a couple of things. So, the way in which $1 of tax money was inputted into each system, right, was done as revenue. What is being returned in terms of the level of service? So it's essentially an efficiency or an effectiveness of that dollar investment.
Oh, in return of municipal services?
Yes,
So the higher the number, the better,
the higher the number,
the more value.
the more service is being provided for that dollar. So you guys are you're almost double. There are others that are about where you are.
Is Hempfield's number more than almost triple?
There is
that
not
because of the local
police.
Yeah, they don't have a police department.
So, again, this is it's a scaled discussion. Is honestly how we were just trying to consider this. Again, we have to verify a few more of these points. But again, to understanding, is there an effectiveness to the investments being made? And the answer here in North Huntington is yes. And we looked at that in comparison to others, and sometimes they're in that range, sometimes they're lower, a couple are higher, but it is to that point of what services are being provided, right? So it is not across the board even having the same level of that delivered. So, for, to a particular point, in the case of being the police anymore. So that one aside, and North Braddock aside, I think there are some similarities, sort of looking across the sheet. So, okay?
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting.
So. All right. So if there are particular points where if you spend the next week or so, or you're passing the potatoes next week, or, something, and a thought comes to your mind about how, the ways in which, some of these things are being provided, or, and you want to jot an email, we'll be one of them, so we can take a look at that, and we'll narrow in on some points, because all in all, in the comprehensive plan, there also is a need that we are ready, this many. We just want to take a look at some the ones that are of greatest interest to you and dive with it. Okay. Last but not least, I think as we consider some of these tools, right, I introduced some concept, some terminology tonight. We're going to be looking next month at some more specific things as it relates to land use, as it relates to the possibilities of the additional connectivity, and then some priority areas as it relates to sort of the infrastructure and, transportation systems to go, like, in the balance with that land use. So we'll be getting at that technical side and some mapping, at the next meeting. Anybody have something that's burning surprises that they found in input?
It's always hard when you have a survey, because I'm reading a lot of these comments, and it's like, there's too much development. Then there's other ones, we need more development.
That's right.
So how do you,
There's ones that say, I hate the school, and there's other ones that say, I love the school.
yeah,
Right,
right.
so,
So bring the extremes into some
That's-
sort of center.
And that's where, next time when we take a look sort of at the land use, the actual land use pattern, and we have those maps and we consider, okay, what are the possibilities for where the infrastructure is, what are those densities, where are there, what does the existing ordinance allow as it's drafted for the lands that have not yet been developed? And what kind of impact would that have from a resident base, resident cost, like a services cost, all those kinds of things, and so being able to get into the balance.
Are we digging into the ordinances, or is that something totally separate? 'Cause that's a big, massive project, right?
This project is going to set the stage, pardon, at that being an update. And the consideration for the particular areas of focus, sort of scaling, sort of the priorities of that attention is something that we will be addressing as part of here. But actually, the ordinance updates in and of themselves is not within the comments.
One of the biggest things that I saw in the comments were, why don't you allow certain businesses here? And I get them in emails, I get them in my business. It's like, why don't you let this restaurant come? Why isn't that? Well, that's all they have to do is come and apply, see Ryan, and if they meet the criteria for what's supposed to be on that piece of property, we're not prejudiced to what, if that's what they think. We're denying certain businesses not to come here.
So a couple of weeks ago, or just right around our meeting time, this is in your hole punch packet, was the article, the city should put a Trader Joe's here.
Right.
And other muddle thinking about development. So to your point that it's a common
Misconception of how they,
conversation.
yes, it is. And I'm sure Ryan, you've heard the same thing. I mean, when you get out in the community, if they know, and they know I'm on the planning commission, why don't you allow this? We don't disallow it. They just haven't come and made an application, and if they meet all the criteria that it's supposed to be for a property they want, well, they can go through with it.
And so that, I think within this plan, as we get into the land use discussion, just having, not everybody's gonna open up the book and read that particularly very important and effective paragraph, right? But at the same time, if over the months or years that if the township wants to put out information like, did you know, kind of stuff, right? And highlight something from the comp plan. And then the next month, did you know? Like, you just kind of you can get those nuggets out there and how it relates to what, again, is on the township side of it. It's really trying to do that education piece and offering what is here and what's not, and reasons why.
I agree with you on that.
So,
Well, at some point, I think that people have to realize that some of this stuff is gonna take some money to do. And the school district, they raise their millage and all that, and they have their reasons to do that. But the township, we haven't raised our taxes for how many years? I mean, it's amazing.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Well, we lowered them in 13,
Right.
and I don't know when the last time they were raised.
Right.
Before that, they're fine. They're not
So,
phenomenal.
I think that they have to realize that if they want the school district to provide all this stuff, that's all fine and dandy. But if they're going to ask the township to help, then we're gonna have to come up with some funds to help them out.
Somebody has to pay.
Yeah, so In other words, you can't have your cake and eat it too, or your donut.
No, donut.
You have to consider all of those things, and when you consider the amount of senior citizens in the district, that's an impact for their financial situation. So I think that at some point, we need to discuss like how this will be implemented, if it's implemented. And I think by doing what you're saying, putting those questions out to the public, like at some point, are you willing to pay more?
We had one option here that, like Hempfield Township recently did, was they sold off their municipal authority, and it was a substantial amount of money, but that's a one-time thing
Yeah.
to set you up for whatever. That's all how it's, worded and negotiated, but that's a option for a lump sum or over so many years paying out whatever. And,
I found it interesting last week that the township just proved they're okay paying taxes in the library. And 2/3 of the residents wanted to continue paying those taxes. The township literally had the option to lower their taxes last week. But they saw the value in that. So
There's
it's
also
on how the
funding.
township sells the value.
Right.
Yeah.
to
Also
something.
funding outside of taxes too, though.
Right.
So if you start that nonprofit corporation, you go for grant money to fund a lot of these projects.
And they're probably more likely to go along with that if we do include the all ages thing. And I think that's gonna be a big part of it when we come down to it.
So while we've talked sort of about these 5 themes, I mean, the one in the middle is, an umbrella piece. There is the actual physical component of it, and then there are things in terms of, I'm saying sustainability, not because we're gonna be the green weenies, it's a matter of what is that short or long-term cost, what is the short and long-term personnel commitment to. So I think within this comprehensive plan, sort of based upon some of these topics, we're gonna have the ability to structure things in a way that the township is going to be able to say, okay, if we're pursuing these kinds of things, these are the ways in which, there are a couple choices here, right? And it's not, things over the next 10 years are gonna change. So being able to be fluid to that, but it's also a matter of who else needs to be at the table for some of these things, because the last, I know we have to wrap up, but that last piece of, have the school districts and municipalities done these types of things in the past? They are 2 separate entities, fully aware. But it's also a matter of in places that are built or in, meaning developed over time, the costs for both entities to be able to take care of things is continuing to go up. So if there are opportunities for realizing some efficiencies in the coming decades, then maybe it is North Huntington that's able to be at the forefront of at least exploring the ways in which that set of questions can, continue to come to the table. So that you as you're a responsible community, and that's something we want to come out and further emphasize in this plan. So, kicking us out for scouts, they're coming in here? Okay. Well then, if there's no objection, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. He's gonna turn off the